There are several measures you can adopt to protect yourself and others from getting the new coronavirus. Frequently clean your hands by using an alcohol-based hand rub product like a gel, or wash your hands with soap and water. When coughing and sneezing, cover your mouth and nose with flexed elbow like this, or use several measures you can use a tissue to protect yourself and others into a closed bin. Avoid close contact with anyone that has fever and cough. And if you have fever, cough, and difficulty breathing, seek medical care early and share information about any recent travels with your healthcare provider. If you just have mild respiratory symptoms and no specific travel history, carefully follow the precautions I just explained and make sure you stay home until recovery. If you need more information on how to protect yourself from the new coronavirus, check the WHO website at who.int.
The growing coronavirus outbreak is causing chaos in global financial markets. It's freezing supply chains. It's causing companies all over the world to create work-from-home plans and ban business travel. In late January 2020, Chinese scientists in Shanghai released the fully sequenced genome of the novel coronavirus that was wreaking havoc in Hubei province. That kicked off the race at drug companies and government labs to develop a cure for coronavirus, or at least its symptoms.
In terms of vaccines, the U.S. has moved at a pace we have never seen before. Still, it's going to be at least a year to a year and a half until they have a vaccine broadly available to deploy.
It's freezing supply chains. It's causing companies all over the world to create work-from-home plans and ban business travel. Causes a disease that scientists decided to call COVID-19. This naming convention works the same way with HIV and AIDS. So HIV is the virus that causes AIDS, the disease. Symptoms of COVID-19 include fever, fatigue, and coughing. Some people become infected but don't develop any symptoms. Most people, around 80%, recover without any special treatment. About 1 in 6 people with the disease end up developing a serious illness. Older people and those with underlying medical conditions are most likely to come down with serious issues. The disease travels through small droplets that spread when people cough or sneeze. Those droplets land on objects, people touch those objects, and then touch their eyes, nose, or mouth. That's how people catch the new coronavirus. And there's no vaccine to prevent them from getting it. There's no vaccine for any of the coronaviruses, for that matter. Here's why. Vaccines have become a big market for drug companies. Scientists and researchers no longer give them away like they used to with the polio vaccine. Vaccines have become a $35 billion market. There's strong and steady demand for vaccines against established diseases like polio, measles, and hepatitis. Creating vaccines for emergency pandemics becomes tricky.
Unfortunately, developing vaccines and medicines for these kinds of emergency outbreak situations is not good business. We've seen that over history. In Ebola, companies haven't necessarily been rewarded for developing vaccines and treatments there, at least not by Wall Street. In Zika, we haven't seen anything. In SARS, which happened back at the beginning of the turn of the century, we still don't have anything. This is not a business model that appeals to investors in the drug industry because these are not large chronic disease drugs that bring in a lot of money. They're used hopefully for a short period of time to address a problem that then we hope to be able to move past. So it's not a big moneymaker for the industry.
And they're very hard to predict. Flu vaccines, for example, are grown in chicken eggs. Yes, your flu shot comes from chicken eggs, a lot of them. That's been the process for the last 70 years or so. This process takes a long time, and it's not as reliable as newer methods like incubating vaccines in cells as opposed to eggs. More than 100 national influenza centers in more than 100 countries monitor the flu throughout the year and make recommendations on how to create that season's flu vaccines. Government agencies like the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, called BARDA for short, are pushing to modernize the way the U.S. produces emergency vaccines like the flu shot. BARDA's giving grants worth hundreds of millions of dollars to companies like Sanofi, which uses recombinant DNA cells as chicken eggs to produce flu vaccines. More than 100 national influenza centers is to help create 100 countries monitor the flu emergency vaccine and make recommendations on how to create that. In late January 2020, HSS Secretary Alex Azar declared an emergency in response to the coronavirus outbreak. As part of that, established partnerships with Sanofi and Johnson & Johnson to help develop vaccines for the coronavirus. There's an international group pouring money into the vaccine race, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. It's backed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the governments of Germany, Japan, and Norway. It's a relative newcomer to the global vaccine community. It was created in 2017 to help speed up the process of developing new vaccines. So far, it's invested about $23.7 million in the push to develop a coronavirus vaccine. It plans to invest a total of $100 million in order to get vaccine candidates to early-stage clinical trials. The Oslo-based Global Coalition says it needs about $2 billion more in additional funding to fully develop viable vaccines against the coronavirus. Most of the biotech companies working on vaccines or treatments already had a head start by previously working on SARS and Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which are part of the coronavirus family. Biotech firm Moderna has one of the most promising starts so far. It's using a new technique called messenger RNA, or mRNA, to develop its vaccine candidate. The drug maker has already started to deliver its vaccine to national health officials. The vaccine was co-designed with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases after Chinese scientists decoded the coronavirus's genetic sequence in January 2020. Moderna set a record within the drug industry for the speed at which it developed its vaccine candidate. Using its mRNA method, it took Moderna about 42 days after the coronavirus's genome was sequenced. For comparison, it took about 20 months to develop a vaccine to the human testing phase during the SARS outbreak in 2002. Moderna plans to start a small-scale human trial of the vaccine soon in Seattle, Washington, an epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in the United States.
It will take about 3 months or more to show that it is safe. And then if you show that it's safe, you've got to put it into what's called a phase 2 trial to show that it works. And the reason is there's a medical, ethical, and other considerations is that we'd be giving this to normal people to prevent infection. So you must be sure the edict of medicine, first do no harm. So we need to make sure it's safe, and needs to make sure it works. That entire process will take at least a year and a half.
Johnson & Johnson is also in the race. The company is working with BARDA on a potential treatment, but it's also developing a vaccine using a deactivated version of the coronavirus. As mentioned earlier, Sanofi is also working with BARDA on a coronavirus vaccine. It plans to have a vaccine candidate to test in a lab within 6 months and on people within a year to 18 months. But approval could be as long as 3 years away. Inovio Pharmaceuticals partnered with a Chinese company called Beijing Advanced Biotechnology to speed up the development of its DNA vaccine. It received an initial grant of $9 million from the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Inovio is using the same method for the coronavirus vaccine as it did with its DNA vaccine against Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Currently, there haven't been any DNA vaccines approved for use on humans. Doctors and global health experts have tried to temper vaccine expectations, saying that even though this stage has gone quickly, reviewing test results and getting a vaccine deployed to the public could take many more months or even years.
A year to 18 months would still be the fastest we've ever seen a vaccine get developed. And the way that breaks down right now for the lead program is that it is starting phase 1 clinical trials in people now. It'll take about 3 to 4 months, they say, to determine the safety of the vaccine. Then they're going to move into phase 2, which will involve a lot more people. And remember, these are healthy people that they're giving the vaccine to see if it can prevent disease. So the risk tolerance is low, lower than if people were already sick and you're giving them a treatment. So that's why you have to be so careful here. They say it could take perhaps 8 months to get through phase 2. And so that's how you're getting out to about a year before you even know if you have something that's safe and that works to protect people.
Other drug companies are hurrying to develop various treatments for the coronavirus, and they could come much sooner than vaccines. The most promising, according to the World Health Organization, is Gilead and its drug remdesivir. That drug is already being tested at the epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan, China, and Gilead is now expanding to other countries, including the United States, on a compassionate use basis.
We should know within a period of a few months, several months, whether or not this particular drug works. If it does, the implementation of that would be almost immediate.
The pressure to develop a coronavirus vaccine grows each day as the number of infected people rises and the death toll climbs even higher. But there's a real risk to pushing too hard and too fast. Some drug companies plan to push testing schedules into human trials rather than spending months testing the vaccines on animals in labs. That could lead to what's called immune enhancement, where a person or animal who receives a vaccine ends up with a more serious disease than unvaccinated subjects. According to Reuters, leading health and drug company officials recently advocated for fast-tracking human testing of coronavirus vaccines during a closed-door meeting convened by the World Health Organization. The question facing health officials is accelerating testing schedules worth these kinds of risks? That all depends on whether countries like the United States can contain the fast-spreading novel coronavirus.
You're watching NBC News Now special report, Coronavirus Crisis, your questions answered. As more cases of COVID-19 are tallied up, you might be wondering what comes next. NBC News technology correspondent Jacob Ward went to one of the nation's leading epidemiologists at UC Berkeley with exactly that question.
Health officials agree that we are past the point of containment. We're not stopping this thing, and instead we're into mitigation. And one of the primary concepts there is what's called flattening the curve. Even if the same number of people get the disease, it's better that that happen over a prolonged period than all at once. Because if you and I and everyone we know get it right now, that's going to create a peak of infection that's going to crash our healthcare system. If instead we have a long, flat curve of new infections, that's something that hospitals can deal with far more easily.
UC Berkeley epidemiologist Dr. Art Reingold specializes in who lives and who dies during epidemics involving respiratory infections.
So if you go back to the polio epidemics of earlier days or the flu pandemic of 1918, there are a few examples of communities walling themselves off and basically the outside who avoided the epidemic, if you will. That's not so easy to do if you're in a city. There are a few complexities to walling yourself off in terms of food and other necessities.
But in China, whole cities have been shut down, cutting off transmission. Here in the United States, there's almost no history of any epidemic being checked by that kind of action.
Dr. Reingold is betting that herd immunity is how this will end.
If we're starting with a population where no one is immune to this virus, which is what we assume, we can get to high levels of immunity, which will basically drive down transmission and prevent infection through at least two ways. One is vaccination, if and when we have a safe and effective vaccine. And the other is that basically much of the population is immune. We call that herd immunity. Basically, you get reduced circulation because the virus just can't be transmitted to people who are immune. We would rather do it through a vaccine, but a vaccine is not going to be here in time to allow us to do that at least for 12 to 18 months. So.
And even a 12 to 18-month timeline is considered fast-tracking a vaccine. CNBC's Meg Terrell reports on biotechnology and pharmaceuticals and has more on the pipeline of vaccines and other treatments.
Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci, called America's doctor by a member of Congress, is leading the charge on vaccine development in the U.S. He said at least 10 vaccines are in development to try to prevent COVID-19 infection. And his program at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases has moved at a record pace.
Getting it into phase 1 in a matter of months is the quickest that anyone has ever done, literally in the history of vaccinology.
Made by biotech company Moderna, the first batch of the vaccine was delivered for human testing in just 42 days. But starting human trials is just the beginning. The first stage, phase 1, will take 3 months to determine safety, Fauci said. Then another 8 or so months in phase 2 to determine the vaccine works to prevent the disease.
So when you've heard me say we would not have a vaccine that would even be ready to start to deploy for a year to a year and a half, that is the time frame. Now, anyone who thinks they're going to go more quickly than that, I believe will be cutting corners that would be detrimental.
Why so long? Because unlike a drug, a vaccine is given to healthy people, so the risk tolerance is lower than if a person is already sick and needs to be treated. Drugs may move more quickly, both for that reason and because some were already in testing or approved for other diseases. Among the most advanced, an antiviral drug from biotech giant Gilead called remdesivir. It was used to treat the first patient in the U.S. with COVID-19 with promising results published in the New England Journal of Medicine. But experts note one patient is far too little data to draw conclusions about whether the drug works. It's now being tested in 2 clinical trials in China, another run by the NIH in the U.S., and in additional trials run by Gilead.
We're going to know probably by April whether that drug works or not. And that's important because that's a drug that can save lives if it works.
Another biotech company, Regeneron, plans to test a drug for rheumatoid arthritis to see if it could help tamp down dangerous immune system flare-ups that can happen to some patients with COVID-19. But it and others are also developing new drugs as well. Regeneron aims to have hundreds of thousands of doses of a drug ready for human clinical trials by late summer. Its approach could both treat disease and potentially prevent it. In San Francisco, startup Vir Biotechnology has yet another approach. It's isolated antibodies from people who recovered from SARS, a disease caused by a different coronavirus.
The people who get infected with a virus or another infectious agent and recover often do so because they make antibodies, which are proteins that circulate in the blood that bind to the pathogen and block its activity or block its ability to infect cells.
Vir chooses the optimal antibodies and will test those for activity against the new coronavirus. The company is also working with the NIH to identify antibodies from survivors of COVID-19. Vir's CEO George Scangos saying they hope to know within a few months whether they have an approach that could work, but it would still need to be tested in clinical trials. Dr. John.
Thanks, Meg. The whole world may be watching and waiting for a vaccine or for any medicine to help treat coronavirus. But there are researchers working just as hard to find out where COVID-19 actually came from. And here's NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel in Singapore with the likely culprit.
Dr. Anderson took me to another part of the facility to show me where the virus came from. Bats gathered in China for food. A vet here captured one, and in a containment cage, she showed it to me.
And why bats? How confident are you that the coronavirus came from bats?
So I'm probably 90% confident that the new coronavirus came from bats.
The initial contamination, she says, likely happened here at a filthy animal market in Wuhan, China. Someone there, she believes, butchered a bat, came into contact with its blood or urine, and then touched his or her mouth or nose.
And answering the question of where COVID-19 came from does more than just give you something to blame. It will also help scientists address this and other illnesses that make the jump from humans to animals. Elodie Gadden is an epidemiologist and a molecular virologist at New York University's School of Global Public Health, and this happens to be her specialty. So, Elodie, thanks for being here, number one. But let's start off with, how do we know that it's actually the bat's fault?
Well, if you look at the genetic information of the virus, and that's what we do when we sequence. So the genetic information has basically, that's what the genome of the virus has. And this indicates what the provenance is from. So the genetic information is like a barcode. And if we compare other viruses that have been collected in bats, and the SARS from 2003 was a bat virus also, and it's very similar to our current SARS-CoV. And looking at these viruses and looking at their genetic information is like looking at a family tree. You can trace who resembles whom. And that's what we're doing exactly with this virus.
So they're able to look at the virus in humans and trace it all the way back and say, this is where it started. It started with these animals, in this case, bats.
That's right. So if you compare that information, it's basically so similar that for that to happen randomly is practically impossible. So we know the ancestor of the virus in humans had to be a bat virus.
People always talk about patient zero, about trying to get back to that first patient that had this, which in a case like this is virtually impossible to do. But why is it important to find out where it originated, what animal it started in?
Okay, so when you look at what we call zoonotic transmission, so basically it's from an animal to a human, what you often want to understand is what are the conditions that really lead to that kind of transmission. So knowing where the virus comes from is important from an epidemiological standpoint. It's, if it comes from bats, could we prevent such emergence by preventing the contact of human and animal or wildlife, in this case, bats? So it's important to know where a virus comes from.
One of the big questions I get from viewers is this mutating? Is this virus going to mutate and we're going to have to do something like we do with the flu, or could it even be more deadly? Is that something to be scared of?
Well, a virus always mutates. Just by nature, viruses mutate quite quickly, and that's part of their adaptation to their new hosts. And so it will mutate, and it's very possible that it'll be like flu, where the mutations will lead to new surface proteins, and that's what our immune system recognizes, are basically the proteins on the surface of the virus. And the virus, it's possible that coronavirus will be like flu, where although now we're all susceptible and we will eventually, we suspect maybe 70 to 80% of us will catch it, that means we will have some resistance against that version of the virus. And it's possible that it becomes a seasonal coronavirus like we see in the human population. We have human coronaviruses that come back every year. And it's possible that SARS-CoV will be becoming one of those seasonal epidemics. We just don't know at this point. And the vaccine would have to be updated every year, just like the flu.
And up until a couple of weeks ago, it was called novel coronavirus. That novel meaning it's new. And so what you're saying is, since it's new and our bodies haven't found this before, we don't really have much protection against it, but that protection might build up over time.
Correct. That's right. And that's what happens with the flu. All flu, seasonal flu that we see today were pandemics decades ago. So the 1918 flu that we always talk about as the worst pandemic we've seen in our history actually is now a seasonal flu, or became a seasonal flu until we had another pandemic in 2009. And this one also has become a seasonal flu.
So excellent. So hopefully it gets to that point where this coronavirus turns seasonal too, and isn't affecting as many people as fast. But there's been a lot of misinformation about coronavirus on social media. NBC News reporter Brandy Zadrozny took a look at what we should watch out for now.
Now, the platforms have really made inroads to stop the spread of this dangerous information, and today I'm going to talk to you specifically about what Facebook's done. They've made a lot of inroads clamping down misinfo on the platform. Groups. Facebook groups is a feature of the platform where people can gather and sort of talk about any topic, really. And there are almost 100 right now coronavirus groups led by people that are not doctors, are not medical professionals, and aren't experts, sort of leading these discussions. Where that can get dangerous is sometimes these groups are called something like coronavirus CDC updates, but they have nothing to do with the CDC. And they're really spreading hoaxes, lies, misinformation. And so you have to be really careful about what kind of groups you're following, if you're following these groups at all, and really source out the information. So a search for the coronavirus on Facebook brings up really reliable information. The problem is when you go over to the tab that's groups, it's coronavirus, coronavirus, coronavirus warning watch, coronavirus updates. What's more dangerous about this too is when we start looking at groups that are known for spreading misinformation, like this one, Stop Mandatory Vaccination. This is Facebook's largest anti-vaccination group, and what it's done is it's really leapt on this coronavirus misinformation and conspiracies to spread its own and sell its products. So if you just look here, you'll see all sorts of misinformation about coronavirus and then changing it to be an anti-vaccination message. So I do want to leave you with one thing today, and that's how you can spot where a group is coming from. So this is the coronavirus official CDC updates group. It is neither official nor is it at all affiliated with the CDC. But how would you know that? So what you can do is go to this About tab, give it a click, and then on your right, you'll see a tab that says History. If I just click on the See More, I can look through this group's history and see that it changed its name. It was originally in 2018 when it started, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for President 2020. It then changed in 2019 to be Hurricane Dorian official NOAA updates. And now it's leapt on the coronavirus as the newest way to get followers, gain clout. So you have to be really careful about where these groups originated, and that's a really good tip to help you find out. Now, Facebook's been doing a lot to combat coronavirus misinformation on the platform. They're downranking bad information. They're giving the WHO and other public health organizations free ads to spread their message. And just recently, they told me that they're going to stop recommending coronavirus groups in the right recommendation rail. Specifically, Facebook told me, we're focused on connecting people with accurate information and removing harmful misinformation related to COVID-19, including in groups. Anyone who searches for COVID-19 related groups is directed to credible information from health organizations. We already reduced the distribution of any groups that repeatedly share false news, and in the coming days, we'll begin removing coronavirus related groups and pages from the recommendations we show people.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
Let's talk about symptoms now. There's a new